Welcome to MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosi Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or MOTS! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised. Hello, and welcome back to Bon Mots. Today we are viewing a potential Oscar pick for Best Picture, Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson, the sanest man in Hollywood. I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, here with Stephen Ramosi.
Hello.
And Scott Thurlow.
Hey there.
And so for our usual funny log line, we're going to turn to Scott Thurlow.
Yes, so thankfully you mentioned this is directed by Mel Gibson, so I've come up with The Passion of the Gump, which we will discuss more thoroughly soon.
It's a very fitting title. So I'll give the actual synopsis. A good old Southern Christian boy, Private Dawes, I believe, played by Andrew Garfield, decides it's his duty to go off to war, but he can't kill anyone because it's against his religion. So he becomes a medic and goes through a lot of grief for his conscious objector status, but eventually becomes a hero. Instead of taking lives, he saves them.
Sure. Mm-hmm. The end.
Yes. So move on to Stephen Ramosi without further ado for the introduction.
All right. Well, this starts off with a scene from a battle that is clearly going to happen later on in the movie.
Yes. In medias war.
Bodies flying through the air, on fire, and
it's World War II, to be clear.
It's supposed to be very exciting. It was okay, I guess.
It was fine war footage.
It was
sure.
Interesting. It was strange, like getting right into it, and then it cuts to 16 years previously, and it's
young
Desmond's childhood with his brother. I'm going to cut out a lot of stuff here, but he ends up beating the crap out of his brother with a brick, and
yes.
Which I think is supposed to...
Well, it's just really two hits. A brick hit his brother,
his brother hit the ground.
The floor.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with his abusive father and his problems with alcohol and things like that. You find out that his father had been a soldier. Flash forward 16 years later, and the brother survives and is fine, by the way, from the brick hit, in case anybody was wondering. Flash forward later, Desmond meets the love of his life, who
is a nurse.
Is a nurse that he meets after saving somebody's life. Turns out that he wants to save people, and he learns about medicine. Then he decides he wants to go off to war, and that's pretty much it for the intro.
And goes to boot camp.
His wife gets shipped his future wife gets basically shipped on a bus for most of the rest of the movie, and
she comes back for one scene. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple, straightforward. And I don't know, what did you think before I go on?
It was really hokey, as I think we discussed as it was going on. I'm not. I don't think I'm going to give this a very good score. And by not a very good score, I mean the only score that is not good in our...
This December, we did It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart.
Wow.
Which is one of the hokiest movies of all time. And this had, and if Jimmy Stewart were alive...
He would be Andrew Garfield, that's what you're going to say.
No. Andrew Garfield is not as hokey as Jimmy Stewart, but Andrew Garfield underplayed the hokiness that I believe Mel Gibson wanted in this scene. It would have been better served by a bumbling Jimmy Stewart.
I would like to see that instead of this movie, but
yeah, it's at times, at least towards my sensibilities as a moviegoer, my current mind frame, it was almost unbearably Americana.
Yeah.
Kind of, yes. Well, not kind of, very much so. But I think one of the major issues, we'll get to a later question, but the hokiness, I think a lot of the dialogue, goes a long way to me, if not hating this movie per se, just thinking it was, too stilted, just not enough there for me. I wasn't as invested as I probably should have been in a movie of such nature.
Yeah, it didn't, the, war opening was... grab my interest, I guess, right away.
Sure,
but
I guess because it's a war.
It didn't hold it through the introduction by any means. And I will probably argue a little bit with the unbearably Americana-ness of it, because I think this movie was kind of like, I think the point of it is that God is better than America in some way. Like, you know, a lot of Americans were very flawed in this film, and and people that were supposed to be representing the government or the military or what have you were very flawed in this movie.
All right, there's two ways you can take this opening. The one is the way I would like to take it, but I can't, and the other one I think is the real kind of interpretation of it. I feel that idea of the flawed American value system and showing that, like, this is how they portrayed Americans during the World War II propaganda, type of how America was. And then when you get to the war itself, it starts to, or at least, the boot camp, it starts to kind of almost give me a Vietnam era cynicism about World War II.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think it could be a cynical appeal to older Americans as, remember the good old days of, such.
I think it's somewhat both of those, in fact, but go on.
Yeah, it could be both of those, but I don't know if it's as smart as the first interpretation I gave it.
Yeah.
I get that. I'm going to go with something you like to say to us, Steve-O. My gut reaction while watching at least the intro, and also beyond that, but the intro specifically, it was like, this is okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't strong, so I think I'm going to give it probably a soft 0 at the end of the day, because sure, I should be invested in a war film opening with gritty war footage, but I just wasn't in this case.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with a 0 as well.
I am too, but I also am doing that because a lot of the problems that will come later in the film that we'll discuss,
or because of other things, yeah,
upon retrospect, are very manifest in the first act of this work, where characters appear that really have no bearing to the plot.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
They fall off the map, and like the brother, for instance.
Sure.
The brother
Why was he even
never
in the film?
shows up after. No, he was in the film because it's historically accurate
I guess,
to be in the film.
Sure.
So I have to give it a 0
yeah.
for all those reasons.
I agree.
All right, and on to me with the body. So, really, this is a movie in 4 acts, but we'll combine 2 with this part. He goes off to boot camp where Vince Vaughn, which I forgot that he was in this film.
I think all of a sudden until he showed up as this drill sergeant, essentially. Yeah.
Doing his best R. Lee Ermey, trying to be like the drill sergeant there. Yeah, he did a fine job, actually, as a drill sergeant.
Okay job, I would say.
I'm not saying he did a great one.
That was the best comedic section of the movie, I'll say that.
Especially his opening scene where he really is, like, he's marching down the group and just berating everyone. I thought that was very funny. Got a lot of laughs, too. So
yeah.
I guess, but that's kind of my issue with it, is that, like, it was so boxed in. Like, you've seen that character and scene in so many movies. It's almost as if, like, they were, like, cookie-cuttering paint by numbers a war film. Yeah, and I'm going to say that a lot about this film, but that's the first time when that scene was happening, I'm like, oh, great, Vince Vaughn is now the hard-ass drill sergeant, and he's doing the same thing that every fucking drill sergeant does in every fucking war movie.
Yeah, but even if he was, I think he did a good job playing that role. I'm not saying it was bad,
but it bothered me just in the sense that it's like, it was so unoriginal.
Of all the things that can bother you from this film,
well, that was
I think
first
he's
one, that's what I'm
the
saying.
Least offensive, or at least to me. That is. So it comes out that Andrew Garfield refuses to pick up a rifle because, he has a violent past and doesn't want to. His religion is important to him, and it says "do not kill." And he's kind of like a deep-seated belief that guns beget violence.
I feel like it happened several times in this movie where they just kind of spring something on you. And this was like the first really obvious one where like they were clearly trying to set up that he didn't want to actually pick up a gun or whatever when he hits his brother. And then they have a couple of scenes, like the 2 scenes later where he almost kills his father. But there are points where it's like you didn't actually build up to this.
Yes,
you're not
exactly,
you
Steve-O.
should not be allowed to like use this as a plot point, as like a twist or a plot point in your thing, because you didn't build up to it. You have no like foundation for this.
If you will, as something we sort of discuss or apply broadly in many episodes, they didn't have enough narrative capital to cash that in.
Yes, actually that's a great description. So everyone is like, it kind of goes through all the old thing of the drill sergeant and like the captain
training
of the,
montage, blah blah blah. Like everything.
They're like they want him out, so they're punishing the entire unit, and the unit is beating up this guy, but he's being stubborn and saying. So they eventually court-martial him. His dad comes back, and as mentioned before, he was a World War I soldier, so he calls up some of his the brigadier general, but at the time he was his captain, to kind of send a letter saying, yes, conscientious objection is a real thing. You must let him go.
Yeah.
And he gets out of boot camp, ends up as a medic in Okinawa, into some of the bloodiest and most convoluted war footage I've seen.
Well, that's why I said Passion of the Gum, because the war footage was like that in the Passion of the Christ scenes.
It's a half hour of smoke and people who I vaguely remember dying very quickly. And you go through the old, like, they're trying to storm a place, Hacksaw Ridge. It's a bloodbath. They're like the Japanese and Americans are going back and forth on it. And eventually they take the ridge and settle down for the night before the Japanese counterattack. And I think that's where the body ends. And I think you pointed up Iceman from
the asshole member of his platoon who always challenges him and is calling him a coward and so forth.
Yeah, they have a bonding moment.
Sure. Then they become friends because you've seen that in every other war film as well.
This kind of goes into what I said earlier about like not really building up anything, but I feel like everything that they wanted to address in this movie had exactly one scene where it was addressed, and that was it. Like, his father wears his, like, they talk about him being in the military, but like, he actually uses his military background in any way in like one scene.
Yep.
Where he shows up and gets the letter, and then he's gone for the rest of the movie. But like, you know, his wife shows up to try and convince him to accept the guilty plea and just come back home for one scene.
Yep.
And that's it. And like, there's just like all these things that I feel like could have had more build up. They could have combined things into other scenes and like maybe teased them a little bit, but they didn't do any of that. It was like, all right, here's the one scene. All right, we got that out of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Now moving on to the next thing. All right, we got that out of the way. Now moving on to the next thing. Like, they had to get through a bunch of historically... I feel like they had to get through a bunch of historically accurate things.
Sure.
You're like checking things off of a checklist as you feel like film the scenes, and there's like, all right, time to get to war.
Two quick things. Scott, you had mentioned before that this reminded you of Bridge of Spies from last year's Oscar things, and in a sense, for what Steve just said, I'll agree with, where it had to check off certain things for what was historically accurate instead of doing the better aspect of like paring down. But I felt that this movie, and this is probably broaching on themes a little bit, was sort of like watching a porn video and having someone go up beforehand being like, watching porn is a terrible, terrible thing, like moralizing at you for like 20 minutes. And they're like, now here's the
porn.
Here's 2 hours of the most gratuitous stuff you've ever seen. Like, this is moralizing how violence and death are very terrible things. And then Mel Gibson's like, oh yeah, get a close up on that guy
Make sure
bleeding
the
out from
bodies
the
are burning real nice there. Yeah, I mean, sure, like, I agree with all of that, and I think if I haven't said it before, I'll say it now. Like you guys just said, sort of a checklist thing. That's what sort of irked me throughout this film. It was a paint by numbers. Like, yeah, Steve-O, they had just enough bare minimum to set that up, but like not just enough, and that's it. And everything else, also, again, like I said, the Vince Vaughn drill sergeant scene, or the training montage, that boot camp scene, and this guy's an asshole in my platoon, and this guy's the friendly guy, blah, blah. Like, it's like every stock character you've ever seen in every war film slapped in, given just enough random reference Office Space. You want to wear 30 pieces of flair? Okay. You want to wear the bare minimum? Okay. But that's what this movie felt like, because that's how it came off and how it was written and directed.
Yeah, like the introduction to all of the people that he goes to war. By the way, I've never been in the military, but I'm fairly certain you don't just stay with the same exact people that you went into boot camp with for the entire time.
Including your drill sergeant.
Yeah, the drill sergeant who's yelling he was now alongside you in battle.
But like, they give like a 2-minute introduction for all of the side characters, and then they barely have any other
I don't remember any of their fucking names or even what they look like now, even having just seen the film. So for all that, like, I think, again, like, it deserves a 0 just because it kept my attention just enough, but that's it. And I was almost like, not again bored, but I was like, all right, let's move on to the next thing. Like, you're not going to do anything more with this anyways, so let's just get to the end now.
I have to disagree. Do the half glass full on this. That they did do enough of it well that it kept my interest throughout the second half.
It was losing me, is all I'm saying.
It was convoluted at times, but I'm not going I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt to say enough was well done to give it a soft 1, which is, I think, right on the opposite side of the coin of your soft 0 for it.
Yeah, sure. But I'm still giving it a soft 0.
I will agree that it kept my interest. The film, like, as much as I'm ragging on it throughout so far, it's not bad.
Sure, I'm not saying it's a horrible film or anything. It just wasn't good enough.
Yeah, it just felt like it was. I don't know. It felt like it was missing something.
It was lackluster.
But that said, I think I'll probably give the body a 1, a very soft 1, but a 1 nonetheless for that.
The problem is not that I had much expectations going into this work. It's that throughout watching this, I actually liked a lot of what I saw and wish they had done it better.
Yeah.
And it was almost like it had built maybe not narrative capital, but it had built potential capital that I'm like, oh, I want to see where they're going with this. Oh,
but it
they
never
didn't go
went anywhere. Exactly. That's why I'm going to give it a 0.
It is. Like, I will rate this harsher than I would necessarily more cheaply made worse film.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because
I get what you're saying.
It had more potential.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, on to Scott with a conclusion.
All right. So like you said, I think we agree it cuts off after the first time he, Dawes, was it? Private Dawes, Private Combat Medic, sees combat on the ridge, and then they have to spend the night there. And then the Japanese are about to counterattack the next day. So yeah, I think right after he has the bonding moment with his former Iceman enemy, who is now like again, this is like another perfect example of what you guys were just saying. Really, okay, we have about a 4 to 5 minute scene. Hey, here's my backstory. Hey, here's my backstory. Oh, now we're best friends because we're in a war, and I respect you, and I respect you now. Okay, let's move on now. Like that's all they did with the characters. So then the next day happens, and it's again a bloodbath. Like you said, gratuitous war violence is happening. And while Private Medic is trying to save everybody, like dragging people away, like, you know, tourniqueting them and so forth, giving them morphine, etc., doing his medic thing. And then they just get basically decimated. The American troops, that is.
He has this moment of doubt when his new best friend busts
well, that's, I'm not getting that. That happened. So almost everyone in his platoon dies. His original, like, buddies, pretty much.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's why. Like, my voice went up at the end because I don't know. I guess like a lot of people died. Some of them are there, his platoon. Some of them are just other, you know, supporting guys who like backing them up, who joined them at the ridge.
There's one point where he goes like, "Oh, what's your name?" And like the guy says his name, like, "Oh, what was your call sign?" Like, Ghoul. Ghoul was a guy who was established in his platoon. And I wish he'd run around. I've seen this in other war films, being like, "Oh, hey, Tex, how are you doing?" Like, oh, I'm dying. Like, if they gave me that little thing to remember who these people are, but they didn't even do that much.
Yeah, so sure. So then, basically, the Americans are forced to retreat. They're getting pushed back. They're losing the ebb of the battle. So they're basically evacuating off the ridge, and Private Andrew Garfield sees his reconciled Iceman die in front of him, and he like for like a minute of the film, maybe less, he like looks up, you know, to the sky / God.
Why God?
And says like, "What am I supposed to do?" And then 20-second silence. And then he says, "Okay," and then runs back into the battlefield.
Somebody from you know wherever just yells medic.
Yeah. So yeah, that's his sign to, you know, get back to saving lives. So he starts dragging people away, and basically they sort of set this up earlier. Because it's a ridge, they have this huge rope ladder that's like there to get up and down. So he can't carry the wounded guys down it. So he ties them, makes a little like makeshift rope thing, and sends them down. And as the troops at the bottom of the ridge on the other side are evacuating, they notice like basically a body coming down. And not a dead body, but a wounded soldier. So they're like, "Oh, someone's still up there saving people." So he does it a whole bunch of more times, you know, saves this guy, saves that guy. And then the Japanese are closing in. He escapes to a foxhole for a little bit, runs into an injured Japanese soldier there, saves him, of course. And finally, that's it. So does that a bunch of times. after he saves the Japanese guy, he starts to make it down again. And he meets up with the surviving platoon, his commanding officer and so forth. And of course, the commanding officer also, who was sort of standoffish earlier, is like, oh, I misjudge you. You're the bravest guy I know, etc. You're awesome. So now everyone who's left alive has respect for him and respects his belief. So then the next day of the battle, they're going back up to take the ridge. It looks like they get reinforcements. The battle's going to go in their direction, but they won't go up on the ridge until he's done praying. Yes, great. Thank you, Gibson. Nice touch. So then they do it. And of course he does his thing again, except now this time he gets injured and he gets carted away after being told they've won the battle and have the ridge, and he gets to go home.
See, it seemed like he was dead there to me when they were like lowering him back down because he wasn't moving.
No, I think he was just enjoying the view and experiencing God.
He was in serenity.
Yes,
but what Mel Gibson really should have done was just have him give a little thumbs up right at the end.
No. Well, he has got the Bible, of course. The one guy goes back to get his Bible for him as he requests it.
I don't think you mentioned how he gets wounded, which is when he slaps a grenade out of the air and then kicks another one.
Sure, he Spider-Mans it because he's Andrew Garfield for a second. Right, I did not mention that, but it was kind of... I remember seeing it when we were watching it, but I didn't remember it now. Now.
With his palm, like he's in a volleyball match.
Yes,
sure. It's obnoxious. Actually,
yeah, it's kind of bizarre, like out of place, a bit jarring for sure. Weird. You're right. Now that you mention it, it comes off like that. So yeah, anyway,
going down in those fucking tunnels. I guess this is how the Japanese survived all the bombings, right?
Yeah, they dug trenches in Foxhole.
They were.
Shit.
The guys that had already been up on the ridge previously were like, they're insane. They can survive anything. They're crazy. They're a bunch of animals or whatever.
Yeah.
But clearly it was supposed to be set up so that, like, hey, this is how they actually survived in real life.
Sure.
But it turned out to be more like an episode of Scooby-Doo Mysteries where he'll be like entering this one tunnel, then you see the Japanese going.
And then he goes the other side. Yeah, it was kind of like cartoonish for a second there. Sure, but anyway, yeah, I did take the ending scene, Steve-O, as he himself is getting carted away to be at peace. He did his job, and now, he's at one with God again, and he didn't have to pick up a gun, and he saved a bunch of people. Well, hooray for that in the end.
The movie made it clear when they did the overlay of, not credits, but, the title, not title cards either, but the cards afterwards, where it was like, he lived with his wife until she died in 1991.
Sure, I guess we'll mention that too. So they're actually after, like, just before the credits, but after the actual film is like interviews and clips from from Dodds himself and other people who were in his surviving members, the real actual people from the battle. So that's fine. And I mean, actually, I think at least the conclusion was the most interesting part to me. It had, yes, of course, most of the action, and it tied everything up nicely. It was fine, really. It was, again, at least better done for me than the body and the intro on the body. So I may give it a soft 1 in this case, because I think it was at least the strongest act in the film.
I'm actually going reverse of you on this.
Okay.
Because at this point, it's when its failure to set up any of the characters beforehand really shows the glaring weakness of, I have no investment whatsoever in the ending. I started to grow bored.
It's not that I disagree with that, just funny, but sure.
And like, I didn't know who he was saving. I didn't care whether they made it to the bottom of the ridge or not. And I don't know. I just think it collapsed under the weight of its own
failure to set anything up.
Since there was weak scaffolding, it collapsed at the end. I guess is what you're saying. We're making an analogy.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Does anybody know who the guy that brought him the Bible at the end was?
Some other guy in his platoon. It doesn't actually matter. But all I'm saying is, like,
that's what I'm saying. But it should matter.
White guy number 97.
I get what you guys are saying, but I think I pretty much had the ending it had to have, so that was fine. I think, all I'm saying is that it was stronger to me than the other two beforehand.
So we're probably on the opposite sides of the same coin.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to give it a soft 1, but nevertheless a 1.
I mean, the 0 you gave it for Bob.
Okay.
Yeah,
completely.
I think I have to.
Valid.
I think I have to give it a 0 too. I didn't know who anybody was through the whole movie, really.
Therefore, you didn't care if they lived or died. Sure, I get it.
But at the end, it was more glaring to me. I would say. So I'm gonna give it a 0 as well for that.
The problem is, if people I don't know are dying, that's one thing. If people I don't know are being saved, and I'm supposed to have emotional investment of that.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, that's a good
worse
point.
sin.
Sure.
But,
It's even less effective.
Not only people you don't know, but people that you're supposed to know
The
that
movie
you don't
assumes
know.
you do, yeah, sure.
So anyway, on to themes with Mr. Amosi.
All right. Well, there's clearly a Christian, fairly heavy-handed Christian theme in this.
Yep.
He's a conscientious objector who, and this is a true story. So it's actually a really interesting story. I wish that Mel Gibson had done a better job directing.
Yeah, I'm just going to read the biography of Daz.
Yeah. But it's, the whole theme of the hell of warfare and trying to remain above that, I guess, in some way is kind of interesting.
Or I could have been.
That's what I was going to say. I don't know if this movie does enough with its themes to really, I mean, it feels like it's always trying to hammer them home and like missing the nail.
Yes, I like that description.
I kind of agree with that. It is heavy-handed, but they call themselves out on it enough.
They sort of
that
lampshaded itself. Yeah, I see what you mean.
I can forgive it for that, but I think it's an interesting message too, especially coming from Mel Gibson. And not suggesting he's a violent maniac, but
but other people have
also.
But more so, it's the idea of returning to the kind of Christian nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is supposed to be a message that Christians don't want to go to war, and that it's the religious thing not to engage in like war out of anger and things like that, I'm all for it. I wish someone had given this movie to George W. Bush before the Iraq War. But like, no, I think it's I'm very much a pacifist and very anti-war, and I like them. Like, even though if I don't agree, if I think they're coming to the right conclusion by the wrong means,
sure,
it's still the right conclusion they're coming to.
I see what you mean.
And I kind of like that turn the other cheek mentality. And yeah, it does. There is an element of Christian persecution to this, of like, oh, look how punished the Christians are, and that's in all of Mel Gibson's work.
Sure.
We're just trying to be like nonviolent and peaceful, and like people are literally trying to murder us. I think it gets its message across, even if I don't necessarily agree with the message.
This is a quite tough one for me. So I was going to throw like something somewhat humorous, but I would believe historically accurate. Sure, maybe, but religion, and specifically Christianity, I would say, is responsible for many, many deaths throughout history. And yeah, I get like this, not like sort of extra baggage. So sure, maybe that is the message, but I think because, as you mentioned, Steve-O, it was so heavy-handed. Like, yeah, I got it. And not that I necessarily, as you said, disagree with it. It's just, it was delivered so poorly. And also, is it going to galvanize Christians in this country and or elsewhere to lay down arms, to stop being zealots?
Regardless of
if this movie ends war, then all right, it gets a 1. But I don't think it's gonna.
But even as an attempt to, if that was his message behind this,
sure.
Although there is a level of gratuity to it,
exactly.
I joked about porn. It's a pornographic level of violence in this,
yes.
And to the point of. And Mel Gibson, I'm interested in the psychology of Mel Gibson.
Okay,
are you?
Yeah, because he is he is has such violent imagery that he loves, but it seems like it's a man in conflict with himself trying to express something through this movie. And I don't know. You guys seem to disagree with me, but I think that at least the attempt was made to a message I can agree with.
No, I don't disagree with that. I don't think it was delivered well or like coherent enough for me. Like, even though, yes, I understand the message, but what was the effectiveness, I guess, behind it? I don't know. As I said, this is a difficult one for me. I'm kind of on the fence. You got anything else to add? Steve-O?
I'm not going to convince you other than what you're thinking, Scott. Honestly, I pretty much agree with you. I think that, well, yes, it does seem to be, to some degree, anti-war, or this is what war turns people into type of movie.
Can agree on that.
It just seems like it doesn't actually hit its mark. nearly often enough in terms of what it's trying to do, and the level of violence that's in this film was strangely like, I don't know. It seems like it's counterintuitive.
Right. It's exactly at odds with
what
its message,
the theme
I would
is
say.
supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's a movie at war with itself.
Exactly.
Sure.
Which normally I would like that guy. I would
If
I would give it a 1.
If it was intentionally that way and
Exactly.
used like properly, I could give it credit for it, but I don't think that's the case.
It's like a madman scrolling on the walls.
Exactly. I think it's down to this, as you said. If this movie is like a sort of projection of Mel Gibson's psychology, it's fighting itself. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I'm going to give it a 0.
I'm probably going to give it a soft 0 too.
I'm going to give it a 1.
All right.
Okay, it's on to the antagonist with me. Which the obvious answers are the Japanese or war.
War is what I was going to go with, yeah.
But
Or military bureaucracy.
but those aren't. It's because Andrew Garfield's character is about faith. And it's, in a sense, it's his challenges to his faith and to his ideals, and in all of the ways they form, whether it's people legitimately attempting to kill him, or if it's like getting beatings by his fellow soldiers, or it's his wife saying, "You're risking prison, like just confess to being a heretic," and
Sure.
and they'll like. It's a story of a man struggling with his faith, and I think that's what, like, all of those things are what's antagonizing him.
Sure.
And it challenges that, and I don't know how effective they all were, but I think that's what it is.
Well, that being the case, I don't think it's... He never once throughout this entire movie, after, he was a child, wavered in his faith.
No, he did for
at
20
all.
seconds is what I'm going to say. And that,
Did he?
yes,
2
for
times
20
he did.
seconds is what I'm saying.
20
Like
seconds.
briefly. The briefest of all briefest moments.
Like, he never... It was like a shot of him thinking about things, and he was like, and you were like supposed to get from that
Yes,
he was
exactly.
thinking about whether, but they said it from the beginning that he is somebody who doesn't come to any decision easily. So I don't even take that as a wavering.
Would you have preferred Charles Heston and giving a strong grimace on his face?
I don't think Andrew Garfield did a bad job, but I think
did. I think he did an awful job.
I don't think so.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second.
I mean, his character didn't waver. I still, like, you guys are going to make your points fine, or your challenges to this, but it didn't seem to me that he was ever in danger of like picking up a gun, or of saying, I don't believe in God, or anything like that. Like, he was never in danger of losing his faith, to me.
no, I'm agreeing with you largely. It's almost like we said earlier, where it's the briefest of all brief things, like, oh, he struggled with himself for like a minute at max, and now he's fine. And so, yeah, it wasn't enough there. Yeah, while I agree that those is like the biggest antagonist, he doesn't feel necessarily all that antagonized, and if he does, he shakes it off like almost immediately.
Yeah. I'm going to give it a 0.
Yeah, I think so.
I think I
will
to.
as well.
This movie
Sure,
is-
if it was war, like, of course we can make that point, but I don't think this was a personal story, like a biopic essentially, about this one man and his beliefs, as you said, E. And I suppose, like, it wanted you to think it's about his struggles, but he didn't really struggle that much with it.
I don't know what to do with this.
Now you're struggling with yourself.
I think that's more of a flaw of the protagonist than it is.
No, I
with
think it's the movie at
genuine
large.
nature of the antagonist.
Maybe. I mean, I see your point there, but
Because usually, but
There-
here's the thing: is
there-
usually a good antagonist molds a better protagonist. But here it fails on. Instead, it seems like both counts to me.
yes.
So I
I
might
kind of
have
agree.
to give a 0 to it.
Okay.
I also am giving antagonist a 0 officially.
And onto protagonist.
Bringing me with protagonist, Andrew Garfield, Private Desmond Dawes or whatever, Private Double D, Diamond Dog. And I think, like, E, that it seems to me you think Garfield didn't do that great of a job. I think he did like an okay, again, we overuse this term, but there's nothing else to say, serviceable job at best. So yeah, he was all right, but because of that, he wasn't good enough to convince me that he was struggling with his internal, doubting his faith or and what we just said to antagonists. And he was sort of like bland for the most part throughout.
Forrest Gump is the perfect thing. It's that nothing can phase this man.
Exactly.
He's wandering through life with blind faith, and not the band, because that would be a much more interesting movie.
And somehow that still shields him.
And it shields him from having to make any tough choices.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, that's pretty spot on to me.
It's not.
I agree with it.
I'm kind of right on the edge with this. I thought that Andrew Garfield did a fine job in this.
Yeah, a fine job, but
your eyes
job.
say differently.
There were points where he smirked inappropriately, which bothered me a little bit.
Okay.
I didn't know why he was smirking, but other than that, he as an actor, I think he did a good job of convincing me that he was this like unwavering guy, and that's what Mel Gibson wanted him. Let's be honest. That's what Mel Gibson wanted him to be. Or
so that makes him a Mary Sue.
Whoever wrote the script as well. Yeah, exactly. He's somewhat of a Gary Stu, I suppose.
Yeah,
but I believed that his character believed it. Like, he did a fine job convincing me of that.
That's a really good point. True for me that you just mentioned that. Go on.
Not having a good antagonist always makes the protagonist weaker, and I didn't think that anything really made him. And it's weird. So I guess I didn't believe that he actually loved anything except for God in this movie, like his wife, his family.
She wasn't in it enough.
I didn't. The people in his platoon. I didn't actually think that he. Not that he didn't care about them, but I didn't believe that he loved any of them, which may be a flaw of the character. I don't know.
I think that's too deep. Even the movie didn't consider that level of deepness, I think. And that's a flaw of it, in a weird way.
I think the devil himself could have appeared to Andrew Garfield, and he would have been unfazed by it. I'm sure the true life individual is a fascinating person. His character as portrayed in Hacksaw Ridge is he occasionally made 20-second expressions of doubt, but I was never worried about him. I was never didn't feel like it felt like he was walking through one of the bloodiest, like, it's almost like this was a ride at a theme park or like a shooting gallery where things are popping up in the background. He's just sitting in his little thing, pulling people. It didn't work for me.
Yeah, I get it. It's to me, like, it could go soft 1 or soft 0, like, easily, either way. And you're right, like, the point of having a weaker antagonist, like, sort of automatically makes protagonist weaker. I think that's very much true.
But no matter how strong of an antagonist you gave him, I doubt it would have mattered.
Like, you both made very good points just now. I'm trying to, like, parse it out what side I fall on.
I'm going to make a call on this.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a 1. It's a very soft 1. I think that he did a fine job.
You know what? I think I might agree with you, Steve. He did a good enough job, even though, like, there were many weak points to it. Yeah. It wasn't weak enough for me to give it a 0.
I think he did. It was an awful character and an awful portrayal, so I'm going to give it a 0.
All right.
And supporting characters with Stephen Ramosi.
All right. So, most of the supporting characters can go screw in this because I don't remember them. And
they did, and they got blown up as well.
They didn't do anything, but I will give a shout out to 2 of them, which I thought were good.
Come on, you get to pick 2.
All right, I'll take one. I'll take one.
Sure.
And I'll leave you the one that you want, Scott.
All right.
So I thought that Vince Vaughn did a good job as the drill sergeant / whatever the hell else he was when they actually got to war. I don't know why he was there, but he did. He did a fine job.
Don't worry about that aspect of it.
A fine acting job in this, I thought, and
okay.
He had some decent, probably some of the best lines in the movie. So
sure, Vaughn was fine though, and you fed me. I'm of course always going to love Sam Neill. And the fact that he played the father, like the drunken, like haunted by what his World War I experiences, and somewhat abusive towards his family father, but still a well-meaning guy at the end of the day. I mean, if a grand tradition of picking one, he's always going to do a good job, even though, again, like you said, he wasn't in it all that much, but I liked him in it, so he gets a 1 from me.
Honestly, Sam Neill saves the supporting characters for me.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to give it a 1 just for him.
I agree. And there's a bunch of other supporting characters who have one interesting characteristic to them and then disappear.
And that's the entire point of them.
And
there's the naked guy. There's the guy who looks like Native American, I guess, according to
this guy who looks like John Waters.
There's a guy, the guy with the knife in his foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guys that played poker.
I don't know if any of them survived or not. And but there's also his nurse wife.
Sure. Dorothy,
who,
I think was her name in the film.
Who did a fine job.
She was there and she was all right, yeah.
10, 15 minutes of screen time she got.
Yeah.
So, I'll give it as 1 for Sam Neill.
Yeah. And everyone else was fine, but he certainly gets a 1 from me.
Yep.
Okay, and dialogue.
Oh boy.
With me. So, Vince Vaughn had some good stereotypical drill sergeant
yes.
lines. He pulled them off well, too. Beyond that, like, Sam Neill had some good rantings as a drunken father.
I would say most of Sam Neill's appeal was in his acting, though.
Yeah.
And not the lines that he had.
Sure, but he did a good job with the lines, even though they weren't all that interesting.
This was perhaps the most cringeworthy movie I've seen.
Dialogue-wise, I agree.
Yes. Like, especially the first third of this when he's like back at home and like attempts at romance. I don't know if it's because James Garfield and the nurse wife did not have any chemistry, or
that part could have been completely cut out of the film, I think.
For it's better. But I don't know. I have to give this a 0 and a pretty solid 0.
Yes, I agree. It was like, if not still, like you said, you brought up the Americana thing. It felt forced, I guess, is the best way I could describe it. And that made it, large portions of it, cringeworthy. So I think also a solid 0, I will deem the dialogue in this film.
I thought the dialogue was pretty bad. I think this movie was just trying to get by on the strength of its, gung-ho attitude. With,
nice try movie, but it didn't work for me.
and it's, war visuals, which will lead us into the next question.
Exactly. And Scott talked about style.
So style, I think this one is solid. Yes, like you said, if nothing else, the war scenes looked pretty believable. They're sort of like intense, like bodies burning and body parts flying away, and grenades and machine guns everywhere. Smoke is flying across the battlefield. It all looked solid enough. Like I thought it was well done, even though it seemed like some of it. It's weird. Maybe you guys will speak a bit more about it, but one or two like quick parts of it seemed jarring, but it didn't. Like then it kept going. So it was just a little. I just noticed that for a couple of parts of the war footage itself. Other than that, I mean, it was shot perfectly fine. Like again, competent, I guess. Like the shots of him in town when he was growing up and before he joins up, and even like the boot camp stuff, all that was perfectly fine. There were no like amazing shots that I can think and say, oh, that one was, that little scene was really cool because of the cinematography, but it wasn't odd or anything else beyond what I just briefly mentioned. So yeah, I mean, perfectly fine, framed and blocked and so forth. And Steve, I guess I was going to talk about soundtrack, but was there one? There was certainly music, I guess, but totally forget it.
There was a score, but it wasn't. It was whatever.
So, I have to bring up this point because it really confuses me.
Yeah.
There seems to be a little bit of slapstick comedy in with the war scenes.
Yes,
which
that
doesn't
might
make
be what I'm.
sense.
Yeah, you're right. That describes well what I was saying.
A character that I assume I'm supposed to know is crawling up Hacksaw Ridge, or through like the ditches and dugouts on there. He comes across a body in like a crater. I think he's moving out of the way or something like that. And he also starts screaming. Yeah. And he starts screaming, and then the screaming body gets shot in the head.
Bullet goes through both of them. Yeah.
No, he drops the body, and a second bullet comes and shoots him in the head. And
you're right. That is exactly it.
Seems like it's played for laughs.
Yep.
But there's no reason that this type of humor should exist in this movie. It's something that like Peter Jackson,
It would do.
like in his early
Dead Alive or something. Yeah.
I kind of joke in that, but it's not. It's a serious
It's
war
not meant to
film.
be that, sure.
To bring up him again, there's a big common complaint in Battle of the Five Armies, that one of the Hobbit ones, where like, oh, it's this CGI armored individual fighting this CGI. I don't know who anyone is, or like who's fighting who for what reason.
Yeah.
And that happened a lot in this movie. I didn't know who was fighting. I could tell the difference between the Japanese and the Americans by the color of the uniforms, but I didn't know who was getting shot over here. It's panning over to this other person.
Yeah.
This person just got his leg blown off. I don't know who they are. I don't know why they got their leg blown off. So, but that's maybe 1/3 of the battle scenes. The rest of it is well done.
Yeah, so you're right. Like you hit it perfectly. Where something else, not that moment, but another moment like it, where I think a body is burning and falls off a ridge, and I found myself chuckling. I was like, this shouldn't be funny, but it just looks weird and becomes funny. So yeah, and like you're right, it's nice that the chaos of war was well represented, but that means the chaos of war. So I have no idea what's going on or what's happening to whom.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. And another thing is, I feel like Mel Gibson loves like smoke and fog.
Yes,
in order to make it
mask all that
very
shit.
unclear what the hell is going on. I don't know, like, and that leads to like location problems and all of, and everything.
Mhm.
You know that he's kind of done. There's this weird. Like, I don't have the sense of where things... Like, we were talking about this in one of the first movies we did, in Mad Max. You always knew where you were when you were following Mad Max. It was very clear. And you don't really get that in this.
You get the opposite of that, in fact.
I would say that the realistic violence and the confusion of war comes across in this movie.
Right.
I think I'll probably end up giving it a 1, but... It is not a movie without its stylistic problems. I will say that. There are issues, but I think for the most part there are some well shot scenes. Even in the beginning, there are some really cool scenes where like when they're climbing up on the
mountain,
on the rocks, they're going through the forest and stuff like that. I like those scenes. Like you said, there's not much of a soundtrack. There's a score, but it's not super memorable.
It's unremarkable, I would say.
It's no Star Wars.
Sure.
And that's pretty much it for style, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a
I'm
solid
gonna give it,
1 for me.
I'm going to give it a 1. It's a softer 1 for me, but it wasn't poor, that's for sure.
I agree. All right, and on to recommendation with Mr. Mosi.
I'm going to have to go with a no here, Ian.
Okay.
It just wasn't... There are, as you've said, Scott, there are better war movies.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I like. There's something about movies that Mel Gibson does that I just am not a huge fan of.
I somewhat agree with that. I pretty much agree with
a lot.
it.
Like, this is weird, but do you guys remember? Did he direct The Patriot?
Yes.
Yep, I'm pretty sure.
I could kind of tell because this movie felt like that. In the way that I just didn't really like it, and I couldn't put my finger on it exactly why. I probably know a little bit more why with this one, just because I've been reviewing movies for the last 2 years. But it's just not like there's something about it that's not up my alley. It's too obfuscated. There's not really a clear message, and what message there is just isn't all that compelling.
I think there's an interesting story to be found in all this stuff. It's just that it didn't make it into the film.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guarantee the story about the real guy is much more interesting.
Sure. And so again, like we said, it's sort of the Bridge of Spies issue. Like in any other universe, this movie shouldn't be nominated or be considered, but because of, I guess, surrounding factors, it's probably going to be. So, but I would say if someone asked me, hey, should I go see it? No, skip it, or see it out of theaters. Wait till it either if it is an Oscar film, never see it, and if it is, like, sure, maybe you can check it out if it makes it into the list.
If you're doing what we do and trying to watch all Oscar movies,
exactly. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
I hope it becomes an Oscar film, just so we didn't waste our time.
Exactly. Right.
There are people I would recommend this to. And I think that I know people who would find this movie very enjoyable, particularly older religious individuals. Scott, I think your dad would particularly enjoy. I just kind of get that feeling.
Maybe.
But I would say no. Like, go watch Full Metal Jacket, or Hot Shots Part 2.
Yeah.
Which is a much better war film.
Pick one of the 7 or 8 war films that this movie like still little bits and pieces from.
Okay. Yeah, this one's
go watch those.
It's actually not as bad as or what our overall score is going to be. I just don't think it's
probably not even
as promise to it, which is the big thing. Like, it went in, and as I watched it, I'm like, okay, I can see the business getting good, and it just never does. And it's overall a disappointing film.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not like a bad film, as we said, even though scores might reflect it on our scale. It's more like an mediocre film, right? To me, at best.
I was gonna say it's probably not even as bad as we've made it out to be in what we've discussed about it. But there are a lot of issues with it, and there are a lot of places, and a lot of those issues are just that it didn't do
enough
what it promised. Yeah. What the movie's promise was didn't fulfill its own promise.
That's well said. So yeah.
One last. I think it really. I think you mentioned this earlier, Steve. I think it failed its basics. It didn't. It was audacious. It had a big theme it wanted to deal with. It wanted to do this epic war story, but it failed with the basic narrative of developing characters. Like as they say in football, you gotta get back to the ground game, the running. Like, it needs to get back to what makes war movies good, and that is knowing people and caring about them when they die.
Exactly.
And it failed miserably at that, especially considering what the themes of this movie are. So
I agree with all of that. So I'm giving it a 0 for recommendation.
Yeah, and I'll give out the final score, which are 4s all around, giving an aggregate score of 4, just below average.
It's on the borderline of mediocre, like I said.
Yeah. So I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, here with Steven Hermosa.
Have a good night.
And Scott Thurlow.
See you in the next better war movie. Good night.
This has been MOTS. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manser. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.